My name's Paul Whitaker, 41, born and raised in Missouri. I'm a registered nurse, single dad, widower, all titles I never thought I'd be juggling at once, yet here we are. My wife, Emily, passed away from ovarian cancer 7 months ago, and that grief still sticks to my ribs like bad diner gravy. She fought like hell for 3 years, and I did too. Well, fought beside her. She was the brave one. I thought the worst part of my life had already come and gone. I was wrong. The worst part came in a beige cardigan and a tight gray bun, smelling like mothballs and righteousness, my mother-in-law, Ruth. To be clear, Ruth wasn't always this bad. She was difficult, yes, but back when Emily was alive, there was a buffer. They'd bicker about Jesus or casseroles or whatever petty Midwestern stuff. Ruth decided to make a moral crusade that week, but there was love underneath. Once Emily passed, that buffer went with her. Ruth moved in 2 days after the funeral. Not requested. Not discussed. She just showed up in a lift with 3 suitcases and a photo of Emily holding a rosary like that was some kind of holy laminate that granted her squatter's rights. Just until things settle, she said. She never specified what things meant. Maybe the planet. Maybe the rapture. I didn't have the energy to argue. I was barely functioning, eating peanut butter out of the jar, forgetting to shower, crying in the laundry room so Lila wouldn't see me break. Lila's my daughter. 8 years old. The only reason I get out of bed most mornings. She looks like Emily. Got her mom's nose and her way of tilting her head when she's trying to decide if I'm lying. The first few days Ruth mostly kept to herself, which lulled me into a false sense of hope. That ended when she started reorganizing the kitchen. Now, I know that sounds petty, like, oh no, she moved the spoons. But listen, I'm a nurse. I run on routine and systems. That kitchen was my sanctuary. I'd spent hours with Emily designing it, deep drawers for cookware, labeled spice racks, and yes, a specific drawer just for measuring cups because we were that couple. Ruth took one look and decided it was all wrong. No sense in having cinnamon right next to cumin, she said, rearranging jars like a tyrant with arthritis. I walked in to grab a mug and found my favorite cast iron pan soaking in soap water. Soap. Water. A decades-seasoned pan, the soul of every good stew I'd ever made. I felt actual, physical pain. I told her gently that cast iron isn't supposed to be washed like that. She looked at me like I'd asked her to recite the Constitution in Mandarin. Well, she said, folding a dish towel with military precision, Emily always said you were particular. What do you even say to that? My dead wife always said I was particular? That's her comeback? And that was just the start. Next came the commentary on how I folded Lila's clothes. You know, Emily would have sorted them by color. Then the notes on how I grieved. I never see you pray, Paul. One night I found her standing at the edge of the hallway watching me. Just watching. I asked if she needed something. Just checking, she said. It only got weirder from there. And I only got quieter. See, the thing is, when people show you what kind of monster they are, you don't always slay the beast. Sometimes you study it. You figure out what it eats. What it's afraid of. And eventually, if you're very, very patient, you teach it what fear tastes like. But at that point, I didn't know what I was going to do yet. All I knew was that the woman sleeping in my guest room had her hand wrapped around my life, and she was squeezing slow. A few weeks in, I started feeling like a ghost in my own house. I'd come home from my shift at the hospital, 12 hours on my feet, 2 patients coding, and a family screaming at me because I wouldn't give their grandmother ivermectin, and there she'd be. Ruth. Sitting at the kitchen table, reading her Bible out loud to no one. Not like a private devotional, either. Like she was broadcasting from some invisible pulpit in my breakfast nook. Proverbs 13 verse 24, she'd say, glaring at Lila like the verse owed her money. Whoever spares the rod hates their children. Lila would shrink into herself, clutching a cereal spoon like a defense mechanism. And me? I'd pour a cup of coffee, lukewarm from a pot I didn't make, and try not to scream. I told her firmly but respectfully that we weren't going to be quoting scripture at the dinner table like we were in a tent revival. Her response? She pasted on this fake warm smile and said, oh, I forget sometimes. You weren't raised right. Raised right. As in Southern Baptist. As in Jesus sees what websites you visit. For the record, I grew up Presbyterian. We did potlucks and guilt, but not full-on spiritual terrorism. She criticized everything I did. Not loudly. Not like you'd expect. Her style was death by paper cuts. Little remarks folded into compliments. Like the time she told Lila it's so sweet your daddy tries to do your hair. Emily had a real gift for braiding, but I guess effort counts too. You want to know the worst part? Lila started believing her. One night, I went to tuck her in and found her crying under the blanket. I asked what was wrong, and she whispered, "Grandma said Mommy would be sad you're not going to heaven." I swear something in me cracked open. Not like a clean break, more like drywall being punched just enough to leave a dent. I sat on the edge of her bed and tried to explain that faith is personal, that just because I don't pray out loud like Grandma doesn't mean I don't love God or miss Mommy. But Lila just nodded like she was trying to be polite. I started watching Ruth closer after that. Not with suspicion, with clinical detachment, like I was charting a patient's slow cognitive slide. I'd come home to find her going through my mail. Just tidying up. She installed one of those doormat Bible verses by the front door, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord," like she'd claimed my home via scripture. She went to our pastor and told him I wasn't doing enough to raise Lila within the church. The pastor called me a sweet guy named Derek who still looked like he played bass in a Christian rock band and asked if we could meet. I said sure, then canceled the day of. I wasn't ready to defend myself for not indoctrinating my kid. The thing is, Ruth never outright yelled. Never raised a hand. But she didn't have to. She ruled with judgment and silence. If I made frozen pizza for dinner, she'd sigh and microwave peas. If I told Lila she could have a sleepover, Ruth would countermand it by saying it wasn't wholesome company. When I pushed back, she'd shake her head and mutter, "This home needs a woman's touch." I wanted to kick her out. I wanted to tell her to take her hymns and her casseroles and her passive aggression and go back to whatever retirement community spawned her. But Lila had already lost one woman she loved. I couldn't take another away, not yet. Not without a plan. So I smiled. I started cooking again. Ruth loved chicken soup, so I perfected it. I sharpened knives I didn't use. I labeled spices again, not for me, for her. And every time she watched me in that kitchen, I made sure to be kind, gentle, loving. I let her believe she was winning. I was just setting the table. The real meal hadn't been served yet. I started making dinner every night. That doesn't sound like much, but trust me, it was an operation. My schedule rotated between day shifts and overnights at the hospital, so I had no business playing chef 5 nights a week. But I did it. Without fail. And every meal had one thing in common, it was Ruth's favorite. I'm not talking microwave stuff. I mean real, old-school, small-town Missouri comfort food. Baked mac and cheese with crisp edges, meatloaf with brown sugar glaze, fried chicken so crunchy it could wake the dead. She had no idea that every recipe I used came from a battered notebook Emily and I had kept during our first year of marriage. At first Ruth was suspicious. She poked around the kitchen like I was cooking meth in the Dutch oven. "What's all this for?" she'd ask, tilting her head like a bird of prey. "You," I said. "Figured it was time we ate like a family." She squinted at me like she was trying to find the trick behind the curtain. But there wasn't one. Not yet. Just food. Comfort. Control. I started asking questions, her favorite brand of noodles, how she used to season her soup, what her mother did differently. She softened. You'd be amazed what a bowl of steaming chicken broth can do to a person who's used to controlling people through guilt. Then I started driving her to church. That was a Saturday night and Sunday morning routine. I'd drop her off, pick her up, hold the door. Polite. Present. Pastor Derek said I seemed changed, like grief had matured me. Ruth agreed. "He's finding his way," she told the ladies at Bible study, dabbing her eyes with a tissue like she was narrating some tragic lifetime arc. Grief humbles a man. The irony was I'd never felt more alert. My grief was still there, yes. It hadn't shrunk. But now it was wrapped in something else, clarity. Focus. I was preparing something. Stirring the pot, literally and otherwise. It started to show in how Ruth treated me. One night she even complimented my soup. Said it tasted almost like how Emily made it. I told her that was because it was Emily's recipe. Her real one. Not the one Ruth had published in the church cookbook without asking. She winced but recovered quickly. Well, she learned from watching me. I smiled. Sure. That night, I washed the dishes by hand, slow and methodical. Ruth went to bed early, probably thinking she'd finally broken me in. But something new was happening. She had no idea she was being fattened with kindness. Seasoned with nostalgia. Basted in the warmth of a false victory. It wasn't poison. I'm not that kind of person. I'm a nurse, I know how that ends. Toxicology, police, courtrooms. No, I wanted something cleaner. Something poetic. I didn't want to destroy her body. I wanted to unspool her mind gently, slowly, like a fraying thread caught on a nail. And all I had to do was keep feeding her. Funny thing about soup, it gets better with time. I started keeping notes. Not on paper, too risky. Just mental snapshots. Ruth's sleep patterns, her moods, how much she ate. When she ate. When she skipped meals. What she said afterward. Nurses do that sort of thing all the time without even realizing it. It's a habit. Like breathing. On Wednesdays, I made tomato bisque with basil from the windowsill. Thursdays were baked ziti with a side of garlic bread she'd always say was a touch too crispy, then eat 3 pieces of. Sundays were sacred. Chicken soup, slow-simmered, bones boiled into gold. She watched me make it. That became part of the ritual. Ruth would shuffle into the kitchen in her slippers, clutching that weathered pink Bible with the peeling spine, and park herself on a stool like some goddamn soup inspector. "I'm just making sure you're not rushing it," she'd say, like rushing soup was a felony. Emily always said patience was a virtue. Emily never said that. Emily hated that phrase. But I stirred the pot and smiled. I remember. It started small, the doubt. A raised eyebrow. A sniff of broth that lasted a little too long. "Did you switch brands of chicken stock?" she asked once, poking at her bowl like she was defusing a bomb. "Nope," I replied. "Same as always." "You watched me." She nodded, but I could see the gears in her head grinding. Something was off. The soup tasted the same, but she didn't feel the same. The first real crack came on a Monday. I was packing Lila's lunch when Ruth muttered, "That soup made me nauseous last night." I didn't look up. "You barely finished it." "I know. It tasted strange." "Huh," I said, zipping up the lunchbox. "You sure it's not your meds?" "Could be a reaction. Or just age. Palate shifts are common." She didn't like that. Ruth prided herself on being ageless. The kind of woman who told strangers she was 60 when she was pushing 75 and dared them to challenge her. Over the next few days, her appetite dropped. Her moods sharpened. She'd stare at her food like it was mocking her. One night she straight up refused the soup. Said she wasn't in the mood. That was a first. I shrugged, ate mine in front of her, made a point of going back for seconds. "Suit yourself," I said between bites. "It's better than last week's batch." She stared at me the whole time. Didn't touch her water. Didn't speak. Just sat there like a statue carved from smug insuspicion. The next morning she told Lila not to eat my oatmeal. That crossed a line. She said it sweetly, of course. "I think Daddy mixed up the salt and sugar, sweetheart. Best not to eat it. I'll make you some toast." Lila looked at me confused. I just smiled and said if she wants toast, she can have toast. And I watched Ruth's face as Lila chose my oatmeal anyway. See, Ruth believed in power. Control. The illusion of martyrdom, the long-suffering mother-in-law putting up with a godless, broken widower for the sake of her granddaughter. But the more she tried to reclaim control, the more she unraveled. She couldn't admit that the soup, her favorite comfort food, now brought her discomfort. Couldn't admit that I hadn't changed the recipe. That it was just her. Her body. Her brain. Her guilt. I didn't have to poison her. I just let her mind do the work. One spoon at a time. And soon she'd start choking on the things she served. By week 6, Ruth was barely eating anything I made. Which would have been fine, less work for me, except she wouldn't stop talking about it. She started dropping little comments to Lila. Harmless sounding at first. Stuff like, "Your daddy sure likes his spices these days." Or, "Back when Emily cooked, we didn't need paprika in our soup." First of all, Ruth couldn't cook to save her life. Her idea of seasoning was boiling chicken until it confessed. But that wasn't the point. The point was control. Always control. She was trying to wedge herself between me and my daughter. Again. So I leaned in. "I made chicken soup again tonight," I said one Thursday, setting the pot on the table. "Tried adding a little turmeric. Supposed to help with inflammation. Might do us both some good." Ruth gave me this look like I just confessed to communism. "Well, I'm not inflamed," she said, sniffing the steam like it insulted her. I ladled it anyway. She stared at it. Didn't touch the spoon. Lila, God bless her, took one bite and said, "MMM. Mommy's recipe." That did it. Ruth flinched. Like physically. I watched her eyes flicker, fast, like they were scanning a memory she couldn't quite get a grip on. "Sweetheart," she said to Lila with the tightest smile I'd ever seen, "I think Grandma's stomach is feeling funny tonight. Maybe I'll just skip dinner." I didn't react. Just shrugged. No worries. I'll put it in the fridge. Might be even better tomorrow. That night, after Lila went to bed, I found Ruth in the kitchen. Lights off. Just standing there, staring at the fridge. Like she was waiting for it to whisper back. You okay? I asked, flipping on the light. She jumped a little, then recovered. Yes. Just thinking. She looked pale. Tired. The sharpness around her mouth had softened into something unfamiliar fear. And not of me. Of herself. The next morning, she called her sister. I only caught half the conversation from the hallway. No, it's not spoiled. No, it's not him. He's been nice. I don't know, Barbara. It's just a feeling. I walked in mid-whisper. She slammed the phone down like a guilty teenager. You don't have to be scared of me, Ruth, I said, voice low. I'm not your enemy. She opened her mouth, maybe to accuse, maybe to defend, but nothing came out. Just for fun, I made chicken soup again that night. Added a little lemongrass. Told her I read about it in a health article. Ruth didn't sit at the table. Said she'd already eaten. She hadn't. I think that was the night she stopped trusting her own instincts. Because here's the truth, when you're used to controlling others, nothing's scarier than feeling controlled even if no one's pulling the strings. I didn't need to poison her. That would have been too fast, too crude. No, I just kept feeding her exactly what she asked for. And eventually her mind did the rest. By now Ruth was unraveling like cheap yarn. She started keeping notes. I saw her notebook once, tucked between the couch cushions. She must have dropped it during one of her afternoon rest breaks, which I had learned were just long stretches of staring at the ceiling like it owed her an apology. The notebook was titled Food and Symptoms. Like she was conducting an experiment and I was the variable. Tuesday, soup. Dizzy afterward. Friday, ziti. Gas. Possibly contaminated. Sunday, soup again. Slight headache. Paul watching too closely. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She was losing faith in her own senses. The idea that I could be doing something, that there might be intent behind my cooking, that was rattling around inside her skull like a marble in a tin can. But here's the thing, I never once served her anything I wouldn't give my daughter. That was my boundary. My line. I never crossed it. Did I maybe oversalt one bowl of soup? Perhaps. Did I serve it to her with a little too much eye contact? Possibly. But actual harm? Never. That would make me like her, someone who manipulates to win. And I wasn't here to win. I was here to end it. Then one night, out of nowhere, Ruth asked if I'd sit with her. She was in her chair by the window, wrapped in Emily's old throw blanket like a fading ghost. I nodded and sat. Said nothing. She stared straight ahead and said, I know you blame me. I blinked. For what? For everything. For how I handled the funeral. For the way I talked to Lila. For moving in. I didn't answer. Let the silence breathe. She continued, voice smaller now, almost breaking. I thought I was helping. But I see her, I see Lila, and she's starting to flinch when I walk in the room. Like she's afraid I'll say something wrong again. Still, I stayed quiet. And I keep thinking, she whispered, what if I'm the reason she's forgetting her mother the wrong way? That got me. Not angry, not vengeful, just sad. Because that was the closest Ruth would ever come to an apology. So I reached over and handed her a bowl of soup. Nothing fancy. Just Emily's recipe, down to the tiny sprigs of thyme floating on top. The same one we used to make on Sundays, before the chemo, before the weight loss, before the whispered goodbyes. Ruth held the bowl, her hands shaking. She didn't eat it. Didn't even lift the spoon. She just looked at it like it held every bad thing she'd ever said, every lie, every manipulation, like it was a mirror. You don't have to be afraid of me, I said gently. She didn't answer. That was the last bowl of soup I ever made her. After that night, Ruth stopped asking for meals. Claimed she wasn't hungry. That the smell made her nauseous. Started ordering groceries to the house, bland things, plain crackers, decaf tea, applesauce. She labeled them with a Sharpie, for Ruth only. I didn't touch them. She didn't believe me. But by then she didn't believe anyone. And that, more than any poison, is what broke her. I came home one afternoon to find the dining room chair flipped over, the rug bunched up like someone had tripped. Ruth was nowhere in sight. Ruth? I called out. No answer. I checked the hallway, then the kitchen. Found her crouched near the pantry, breathing hard, like she'd just run a mile. Her eyes were wild and unfocused. She was holding an open box of saltines like it was a life preserver. What happened? I asked, kneeling beside her. She didn't answer. Her lips moved, but no words came out. She finally lifted her hand and pointed at the soup pot on the stove, untouched, cold from the night before. "You okay?" I asked again, slower. Her voice came out hoarse. "It's in the food." "What is?" She just stared. I helped her up. She jerked away from my hand like it burned her. That was new. I offered to make her some tea. She said she'd make her own. By now, Ruth wasn't just paranoid, she was spiraling. She stopped eating anything I prepared, even in front of her. I could cut an apple in half and offer her both pieces, and she'd throw hers away the moment I left the room. The woman was slipping. And I don't mean in a funny sitcom way. I mean in a clinical way. She started locking her bedroom door at night. I never knocked. Didn't need to. She also began sleeping with the lights on. I could see the glow under the crack of her door when I walked the hallway to check on Lila. And the final sign? Ruth began praying in the kitchen. Loudly. At random hours. With intention. Not the warm, whispery kind of prayer. I'm talking spiritual warfare. Deliver us from the serpent kind of stuff. I once came home at 1 a.m. to find her anointing the fridge with cooking oil. I asked what she was doing. She said protection. I nodded, stepped over the puddle of canola oil, and went to bed. And yet she never left. She could have gone to live with her sister in Kansas City. They had a nice place. Or she could have rented an apartment. She had money. Not a lot, but enough. But Ruth didn't leave because that would have meant surrender. It would have meant giving up the house her daughter lived and died in and letting me win. And Ruth didn't lose. She endured. That was her thing. She taught Sunday school for 30 years and treated every conversation like a moral debate where only she had the answer key. So she stayed. Paranoid. Silent. Fading. One morning I walked into the kitchen and found a sticky note on the counter in her handwriting. Do not eat the soup. That was it. No greeting. No signature. Just a tiny yellow scream. I made pancakes that morning. Lila asked if Grandma was okay. I told her Grandma was just tired. Which wasn't a lie. The cracks were there now. Thin, spiderweb lines. Running along the edge of the teacup. It wouldn't be long before the whole thing shattered. I think the night it all tipped over was the night she didn't come home from church. Saturday evening service, her favorite. Lila and I had been watching a movie when I realized it was nearly 9 p.m. and Ruth wasn't back. No text. No call. The church was only 10 minutes away. Now, I'm not a cruel man. Not really. Just practiced. So I did what anyone would do, I called her. Straight to voicemail. I called again. And again. Then I left Lila with our neighbor and drove out to the church myself, half worried, half exhausted. The parking lot was dark. Empty. Just one sedan parked near the side. Her car. I found Ruth inside, alone in one of the back pews, lit by nothing but the exit sign and whatever was left of her faith. She looked thinner than she had just days ago, like the anxiety had started eating her from the inside out. She didn't flinch when I approached. Just stared straight ahead. Ruth, I said gently. You okay? No answer. Lila's asking for you. Still nothing. Then she finally turned and whispered, I think I'm dying. I sat beside her, hands clasped. Why do you think that? She looked at me, really looked, and I saw something new behind her eyes, a raw, unfiltered kind of fear, not of me, not even of death, but of being wrong. Her whole life, Ruth had treated being right as a survival instinct. Now that instinct was failing. It's the food, she said. I know you're doing something. What do you think I'm doing? I asked, soft, careful. She didn't answer, but her lip trembled. You think I'm hurting you? I continued. Why would I do that? Her voice cracked. Because I hurt Emily. I froze. For just a second. She kept going like she couldn't stop herself now. I told her she was being punished. For marrying outside the church. For marrying you. I told her the chemo wouldn't work unless she repented. That God was testing her. Her hands twisted in her lap. She didn't need tests. She needed peace. I exhaled, slow, deep. That was the confession I'd never expected. The one I didn't know I wanted until I heard it. She wiped her face. And now you're making soup. And I don't trust anything. Not even myself. I put a hand on her shoulder. She flinched. I never touched your food, I said. I never needed to. She looked at me like a child seeing the dark under the bed move for the first time. When I drove us home, she didn't say a word. Just stared out the window, small and silent. That night, she didn't sleep in her room. I found her curled up on the couch the next morning. wrapped in her Bible and that same faded pink blanket Emily used to wear on chemo days. The one Ruth never acknowledged. The one I'd seen her try to throw out once before I quietly pulled it from the donation pile. I didn't wake her. She wasn't the woman who moved into my house anymore. She was someone hollowed out by shame, by grief, by the slow burn of imagined vengeance. And I hadn't laid a finger on her, just a spoon, over and over, until the flavor of guilt was all she could taste. The hospital called at 3:17 on a Tuesday afternoon. I was folding laundry, trying to make the corners on a fitted sheet behave like civilized fabric, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Whitaker?" the voice said. "This is Dr. Halvorsen at St. Luke's. Your mother-in-law Ruth was brought in this afternoon." I paused. Not alarm, not panic, just a slow quiet. The kind that moves into your ribs and sets up camp. "What happened?" "She collapsed at a bus stop on Weller Avenue. She was conscious when paramedics arrived but disoriented. Dehydrated. Weak. We ran a full panel. There's no sign of infection, toxins, or any substance of concern." A pause. Then he said it, carefully, like he wasn't sure what version of the truth I was ready for. "Frankly, she's showing signs of acute stress-induced gastrointestinal dysfunction." "Has she been eating?" "Not much," I said. "She's been hesitant." "Hesitant." "She thought I was poisoning her," I said, flat, honest. Another pause. "Was there any reason she might believe that?" I smiled, just a little. Not out of cruelty, out of satisfaction. The kind of smile you give when the world finally lines up with the truth you always knew. "She insisted on watching me cook everything she ate," I said. "She didn't trust anyone else to touch her meals." I could hear the doctor typing something. He didn't press further. "I'll be down shortly," I added. When I got there, Ruth was propped up in a bed, and four in one arm, her Bible clutched in the other like a flotation device. She looked worse than I expected, pale, small, her skin like old parchment. Not sick exactly, just used up. Her eyes met mine, wide, apprehensive. "You're here," she said, voice raw. "Of course I'm here." She watched me warily, like a stray animal trying to decide whether to bite or bolt. A nurse brought in a tray of hospital food, white rice, canned green beans, grilled chicken, sealed in sadness. Ruth looked at it like it was a bomb. "You think they're safe?" she asked. I shrugged. "They didn't grow up with you, so probably." She didn't laugh. Not even a twitch. "I didn't poison you," I said gently. "I never did." She stared at her tray, didn't respond. After a long silence, she whispered, "I believed it anyway. I know. I thought I was protecting Lila." "No," I said. "You were protecting yourself. From the truth. From guilt. From the fact that your daughter died and you needed someone to blame. And I was there." Tears welled in her eyes. For a second, I saw the Ruth that Emily used to describe, from before the bitterness calcified her heart. A mother who made French toast on Sundays and used to sing hymns off-key while driving. "I failed her," she said. "Yes," I answered. That was all. No comfort. No rescue. Just truth. When I left her room, the doctor caught me in the hallway. "You said something earlier about her watching you cook?" "Yes." "Funny," he said. "Toxicology was clean. Nothing in her system. But she's convinced she's been poisoned." "Sometimes," I said, "the guilt does that." He looked at me, then back at the chart in his hands. "She's stable. Might even be discharged tomorrow. We're just waiting to confirm." "Good," I said. "She's got things to think about." And as I walked out into the parking lot, the sun low and clean on the horizon, I realized I hadn't revenged her. She'd done it all to herself. I just served the soup. She filled in the rest. Ruth moved out 2 weeks after she got out of the hospital. No dramatic scene. No confrontation. Just quiet packing. A few suitcases. One-wheeled carry-on with a broken zipper she kept cursing under her breath. She didn't even ask for help. And I didn't offer. She said she was going to stay with her sister in Kansas City. For a bit. I didn't ask how long. I think we both knew it was forever. Before she left, she asked if she could speak to Lila alone. I agreed, but I stood just outside the door, listening. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I wasn't about to risk letting one final guilt trip get tucked into my daughter's pocket like a souvenir. They talked quietly. I caught fragments. Not your fault. Mommy loved you so much. I wasn't always kind. Lila didn't say much. Just hugged her. Kids don't have the words for things like this. They just absorb what they can, process the rest later when the world's quieter. After Ruth left, Lila came to find me. She didn't cry. She didn't ask where Grandma was going or why she packed so fast. She just said, "Can we have pancakes tonight?" I said absolutely. That evening, we ate on the couch, watching an old movie Emily used to love. Lila fell asleep with her head on my arm. The silence in the house was deep, not heavy, not tense. Just still. Peaceful. The next day, I cleaned the kitchen top to bottom. I found Ruth's notebook wedged behind the toaster, the one she'd used to track her imaginary symptoms. I flipped through it again. Pages and pages of nothing. A self-fulfilling prophecy written in her own hand. I didn't burn it. I didn't keep it. I just threw it in the trash like any other fiction. People sometimes talk about revenge like it's this sharp, blazing thing. Fire. Rage. Violence. But that's the cheap stuff. That burns hot, fast, and leaves you with a mess. The real kind, the kind that actually matters, is slow, quiet, and patient. It's giving someone everything they said they wanted and watching them destroy themselves with it. Ruth said she wanted to help. So I let her. I smiled. I cooked. I drove her to church. I gave her nothing to fight, just kindness. Routine. Chicken soup. And when her world cracked, she looked around and realized no one had pushed. She'd done it all by herself. Now I get to wake up in a house that smells like coffee, not judgment. I get to raise my daughter without someone whispering in her ear about damnation and guilt. I get to grieve my wife without being watched, measured, or corrected. I get full custody of peace. And sometimes on Sunday evenings I still make the soup. Emily's recipe. No substitutions. No fear. Just a clean bowl, a quiet kitchen, and the sound of nothing waiting to strike. Thanks for watching. Write your best revenge in comments. And don't forget to subscribe.